It strikes me that we right now are faced with this generation of retirees that in a way are kind of blindsided by all of it.
You're effectively sending people out and saying, here's your savings, figure it out. With pensions, people were on the bus going toward their destination. When they hit retirement, they got off the bus and the pension delivered them their income throughout retirement. Now it's like we're all drivers on the road. We may not know how to drive. We may not know where we're going. And we also know that with older adults, cognitive decline is an issue. And so for the DIY type investor, that's really problematic because obviously they're trying to figure out a very complex problem and they might be doing it with diminishing faculties.
Hey everyone, I'm Jean Chatzky. Thanks so much for joining me today on HerMoney, where we talk about how personal finance and money touches everything in our lives. Today we are talking about retirement and more specifically, the retirement crisis. A few months ago, AARP released a survey that found many Americans over the age of 50 are not feeling super confident about their finances. The most surprising finding is that 1 in 5 Americans over 50 reported having no retirement savings, zero, and over half don't think that they'll have enough money to keep them going in retirement. Part of the reason for this is that while the majority of us, or many of us at least in this country, used to have pension plans, Social Security benefits, and 401ks to keep us afloat in retirement, now we're relying a little more heavily on Social Security, which has problems of its own, as well as the 401k system. I was actually surprised to read that although 68% of us have access to a 401k, only about 50% of us actually use them. Longevity is also a big factor. We are living longer. Life expectancy, according to the WHO, has gone up by more than 6 years over the last couple of decades, up to 73 years on average from age 67. So basically, what I'm saying is when you take all of these factors and you put them together, it just means we have to plan differently, which means we have to make a plan. Once we start putting forward the steps that we're going to need to achieve on the way to retirement and actually making some progress on those steps, it can become a positive, exciting time of life to look forward to, as it should be, rather than something to dread. Helping us craft that plan today, we've got Christine Benz. She is the longtime director of personal finance and retirement planning for Morningstar. She's got a new book coming out in September, which we're very excited about, called How to Retire, 20 Lessons for a Happy, Successful, and Wealthy Retirement, where she asked 20 retirement thought leaders, including me, to go deep on a single lesson that they believe contributes to success in retirement. You can pre-order that book now. Christine is also the co-host of Morningstar's The Long View podcast and was recently named one of Barron's top 100 influential women for her dedication and impact in the financial industry. Christine, hey, always great to see you.
Jean, it's so great to see you. It's an honor to be here, and I love your contribution to the book. You were so unequivocal when we talked about various aspects of women and retirement security. So I love that.
It's something I feel clearly very, very strongly about. I started this podcast with some pretty grim statistics about how much money people are putting away for retirement and how much we've accumulated for retirement versus how much we actually need. Can you explain why we are at this crisis point and the seismic shift, as you put it, in the retirement system that we have seen since the 1970s?
Yeah, you put your finger on it, Jean, that we have had this huge transformation in retirement planning over the past 50 years, where now the onus is largely on individuals to save for their own retirements. And a lot of folks just haven't gotten the message, or I think probably more realistically, just do not have the financial wherewithal to do all the things that they need to do to keep their lives going and to save adequately for retirement. So, as you mentioned, we have a lot of people who are hurtling toward retirement who do not have much, if anything, in retirement savings and will be exclusively reliant on the Social Security system.
You have been in this industry, I think, as long as I have. I mean, I remember talking to you when I was a reporter at Smart Money and when I was a reporter at Money. Did you see this coming?
I want to say I did, but I wasn't as focused on it as I should have been. I think I was, a part of our research team where we were focused on helping people pick mutual funds. I don't think I had my head up thinking enough about these big picture issues with respect to people's retirement plans and other aspects of their financial plans. And that's what I love working on today. But I would say when I started my career, not so much.
I always feel like we've had a seat at the table for this sort of personal finance revolution, but what it's really been is a revolution in responsibility, in the shifting of responsibility from corporate shoulders to the shoulders of individuals when it comes to taking care of not just our long-term financial lives, but our long-term health care in a way. It strikes me that we right now are faced with this generation of retirees and soon to be retirees that in a way got kind of blindsided by all of it. Do you think about it that way too?
Well, I do. And there's so much that's suboptimal about the way we approach retirement, especially for people who are getting ready to retire, because, you're effectively sending people out and saying, okay, for people who have savings, we're saying, here's your savings, figure it out. And Jason Zweig at the Wall Street Journal once put it so memorably to me. He said, it's like with pensions, people were on the bus going toward their destination. When they hit retirement, they got off the bus, they're there. And basically the pension delivered them their income throughout retirement. Now it's like we're all drivers on the road leading up to retirement, into retirement. We may not know how to drive. We may not know where we're going. And we also know that with older adults, cognitive decline is an issue, especially for people once they, move into their 80s and 90s. And so for the DIY type investor, that's really problematic because obviously they're trying to figure out a very complex problem, how to make their money last over X number of years, and they might be doing it with diminishing faculties. So there's a lot that we need to improve on, I think, especially in the realm of decumulation, figuring out how to spend what you've managed to save.
Yeah, decumulation is one of those words that many people have never heard and are going to become so familiar with over the next couple of decades. Well, when we talk about decreasing faculties and getting older, you have personal experience. You write in the book that when your dad got sick, your family essentially handed off financial situations and financial management to you. You became their long-term caregiver. You took on perhaps responsibilities that you weren't expecting to take on. What did you take from that experience that you think we all need to know?
A lot. It was one of the hardest periods of my life. And I will clarify, Jean, I wasn't a hands-on caregiver some of the time, but mostly we were able to hire caregivers for my mom and dad. But I always accentuate the point that itself is no easy lift. Managing, my parents had care in their home. So managing the caregiving situation, caregivers themselves often have complicated lives. We had a mother-daughter team who we loved who were caregivers for my parents, but they were taking care of their own mom and grandmom in their spare time. And so, we're juggling a lot. And when you have someone with Alzheimer's, in the case of my dad, you realize that the caregiver can't go out and do the grocery shopping. Someone else needs to do that. Someone else needs to make sure that, the grass gets cut or if the roof needs to get fixed. So I always say to older adults, if your plan is to stay in your home, which was my mom and dad's plan, just make sure that you have someone who really loves you, who's close by and willing to do all of that other stuff. Even if you have the financial wherewithal to hire those caregivers, you really need a trusted partner to be there. We have a large family, which helped a lot too, that it wasn't just on me. But for people with smaller families, only children, or families of just a couple of kids, it's a heavy lift. So it did make me cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of families where the older adult doesn't necessarily have that adult child nearby to hand things off to. With my parents' finances, I think it was about as seamless as it could be, and that I do financial stuff for my day job. I was always really plugged into what they had going on. And so I was able to kind of pick up and get on their Fidelity accounts. And I knew their banker well. And so we were able to make it seamless. A lot of older adults don't have that easy transition plan that we had. So it's part of the reason why I wanted to work on this book.
Did dealing with Alzheimer's and a longer term illness change your perspective on long-term care insurance? How are you thinking about it for you?
Yeah, well, I did see, I was writing the checks from my parents' accounts for the caregivers. And one thing that emerged with my mom and dad was that my mom didn't have Alzheimer's, but she did have kind of declining abilities as she aged. And so she needed a caregiver. And at a certain point, we realized that my dad really wasn't safe at home, even with caregivers, that we needed to move him into a facility. He had a couple of painful falls. So at one point, we had 2 sets of outlays for long-term care for my mom and dad. One, so my mom could stay at home and get the help she needed. Another for my dad to be in this facility. So I did have an appreciation for just how incredibly expensive it can be, especially for a couple with 2 people who have care needs. My husband's and my plan is still to self-fund long-term care, but we really do want to make sure that we segregate those assets from our spendable assets. We're going to kind of have a separate bucket, if you will, to hold our long-term care expenses. And I think we're also cognizant of the fact that you can have these catastrophic costs later in life. Especially one tricky part of long-term care is, like, if you're physically healthy but you have diminished mental capabilities. Carolyn McClanahan, who's an MD and financial planner, points out that's just a terrible combination. So the healthy person who may have cognitive decline could live a long time needing a lot of help. So I'm cognizant of the risk of being one of those people, especially with the history of cognitive decline that we have in our family.
I'm so glad that Carolyn is part of your book, because she's just one of the smartest people about money and life and perspectives on money and life that I've ever met. So I know that people are going to get a ton out of reading that section alone. You raised the word bucket. What's the bucket approach to retirement planning, and why do you like it so much?
Right. The bucket strategy, I always credit Harold Avensky, who was a financial planner in Florida and the professor of financial planning. When I started working on retirement planning, probably 20 plus years ago, I remember I called up Harold. I had a connection with him through Morningstar. And I was asking him, like, how do you manage your clients' portfolios? How do you manage their portfolios to deliver them that cash flow stream? And he said, well, it's pretty simple. I just run this long-term portfolio, but I also bolt on a cash bucket that if a really bad market environment materializes for stocks or bonds like we had in 2022, I know that we can have the cash to pull from in those periods. And by the way, it also gives my clients a ton of peace of mind. I can do what I need to do with the long-term plan to have sort of adequate risk in that portfolio so that it grows and beats inflation. But they also know that if they start seeing the scary headlines on CNBC, he said sometimes they even repeat it back to me. I've got that cash bucket. And so that means I'm not worried about keeping up with our Saturday night plan to have dinner with our friends, which we do every Saturday night, or that cruise that we have planned for the family next year. I know that those plans won't be disruptive. And so I'm thinking to myself as I'm talking to Harold, well, the behavioral piece of all of this is so huge. Even though the cash is a drag, having a couple of years worth of living expenses in cash is kind of dead money in the portfolio, especially when interest rates were so low for so long. But if that cash can give people peace of mind and keep them comfortable with the long-term plan, well, that to me is just a beautiful thing. So I've been writing about how to implement bucket strategies, how to create your own bucket portfolio. And I also like that it's really customizable based on what a retiree has going on. So there are still people with pensions where maybe the pension and Social Security supplies them with all of their living expenses. Well, then they probably just need sort of a minimal cash bucket on an ongoing basis. But if someone is spending it sort of a more normal rate of like 4% a year, whatever that might be, well, then they might have 8% of their portfolio or like 2 years worth of living expenses set aside in that cash bucket. So I just think it's a powerful strategy. To me, it makes sense in terms of structuring a portfolio. And it's also, I think, an effective behavioral tool. In fact, I hear from readers who say, I've been using this bucket system, and in a year like 2022, I know I'm good. And so I love to hear that people are using it, and it reinforces to me the value of the strategy.
I think that sometimes we push the emotions of all of it, the psychology and the fact that this can be stressful if the markets are roller coastering when you are trying to withdraw your 4%. Sometimes we push it to the side and we're laser focused on just returns over time and averages. And the fact that this acknowledges how valid the emotional aspects of it can be, it makes me feel better. It's certainly something that I'm going to look toward as I get into retirement myself. Jonathan Clements, who happens to be my neighbor here in Philadelphia, formerly of the Wall Street Journal, he now is the founder and editor of a great blog called The Humble Dollar. He wrote the foreword for your book. He said he's been semi-retired for a decade. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, he is not alone. They found that the number of people age 75 and older who are still working is expected to grow by 96% by the year 2030. Why are so many older people expected to continue to work, and what impact is that going to have on their retirement?
Yeah, it's such a great point, Jean. And Jonathan wrote the introduction to the book, or the foreword to the book, and I was so thrilled because he was so influential in my own career trajectory. But that's kind of a separate tangent. In terms of working longer, you at the outset of the show talked about the shortfall, that you've got a lot of people hurtling toward retirement without adequate savings. So for some people, it's the fallback plan, right? It's a way to make a save, to save longer, to have additional years of compounding, to forestall actually spending from whatever investment assets that they've managed to save. So there's a financial reason, but I think that there are also some important non-financial reasons. And that's something that we're seeing, especially in the wealthier cohort of people who are working longer, where they are kind of looking at their lives, and especially for people who have jobs that have been intellectually stimulating, they're looking at them and saying, well, there's something that I get from this, not just money, that gives me a sense of purpose. It gives me a reason to get up in the morning. Relationships we all get from work, and for men especially, and this is a point that we hit a few times in the book, men especially sometimes when they step away from work lose some important relationships that they don't necessarily have in the wild, that they don't necessarily have elsewhere in their lives. So a lot of non-financial reasons to continue working as well, which is, I think is what some wealthier folks are looking at. Even people who have probably more than enough for their own retirements are saying, I probably want to continue to work in some capacity for longer. And many of us do get some physical activity from our jobs as well, even if we're not doing like physical labor, at least maybe we're doing a little commute or whatever it might be. All of that is really beneficial for us as we age.
One of the other reasons that we know people experience a shortfall in retirement is because they never do the math. They never run the numbers to figure out what they are actually going to need in retirement, which is baffling to me as a numbers person, but we're going to dig into that in just a sec. We're a money show, so let's talk about the math a little bit more. How can people accurately start to figure out how much they're going to need in retirement, as well as how much their incomes are going to ebb and flow?
Yeah, it's a place to put your head down and spend some time on the math piece of it, even if you're not a math person. And the starting point would be to go on Social Security's website, assuming you are covered by Social Security, go on and get an estimate of what your benefits will be. So that's the starting point to create that profile on Social Security. Get a sense of what Social Security will provide you in retirement. And then if you're looking for kind of a quick and dirty back of the envelope view of investment assets and whether what you've managed to save so far might support you, well, you can start with what's called the 4% guideline, where you're taking 4% of your balance and thinking of that as kind of a safe starting withdrawal amount. So say I've got $1 million, I'm taking 4% of that. In year one of my retirement, that means I could take $40,000. So I've got those two numbers. I've got my expected annual benefit from Social Security. I've got my safe starting portfolio amount. Look at those two together and see, do those come close to supplying the income that I need? And remember, you probably won't be spending what you're earning today in retirement. You'll probably be spending a little bit less because you're probably saving currently, you're contributing into the Social Security program as part of your paycheck, you're contributing into Medicare. So those things will go away. You sometimes hear about like an 80% income replacement rule in retirement. So if you're making $100,000 a year, kind of a quick and dirty estimate of how much you might actually need would be like $80,000. So take those two things together, your safe spending amount from your portfolio and your Social Security amount, and just see, does that get me close to 80% of my current paycheck? That's a starting point, but this is also a great place to get some financial advice. Even if you're a dedicated DIYer and you really want to save on the financial advice piece of this, there are plenty of financial advisors who will work with you on a kind of a per engagement basis, where they'll do a retirement readiness checkup for you. You'll have to write them a check for that, but I think that can be really money well spent. And then also spend some time with some of these retirement calculators that are available. T. Rowe Price has one that I've long recommended, the retirement income calculator, but a lot of different websites have really good calculators. So spend some time plugging in your variables, get a range of perspectives. Don't just take one calculator and run with it. Run the numbers on a few different calculators. They all work a little bit differently, but the basic input should be the same.
One of those things those calculators and those financial advisors are going to help you do is take taxes into account. And the taxes are the thing. Whenever my husband and I go to the financial advisor for our yearly meeting and we look at this is where the RMDs kick in. This is your chart of how long your money's going to last. The taxes inevitably just blow me away, right? I mean, we are among those couples who have more money in traditional retirement accounts than we do in Roth accounts. We've done some conversions along the way and made some Roth contributions, but taxes are huge, and I don't think people think about it enough.
Well, I don't either. And it's generational, I will say. So you and I began our savings career in kind of like the pre-tax 401k context, I'm guessing, or at least I did.
Yeah.
A lot of my assets are there as well. And as soon as Morningstar began offering a Roth 401k, I began making those types of contributions. But I still have a very big tax deferred balance. And of course, all my matching contributions go in as pre-tax. So those aren't Roth either. So it's kind of inevitable. I do think that the younger generations will probably be coming into retirement with more in the Roth column because they've had a greater opportunity to save in Roth accounts. But it's, I think, something people do not appreciate, the role of taxes in retirement. When you're working, taxes are what they are. You don't have a lot of leeway to control them because your income is taxed. But when you are retired, there is an opportunity, especially in kind of the post-retirement, pre-required minimum distribution years. So say I retire at 65, I have until age 73 to take advantage of what in many households are kind of low tax years, because I'm not necessarily earning an income, and I may be able to take advantage of Roth conversions in those years. I may be able to even accelerate withdrawals from those tax deferred accounts in those low tax years. So this is another spot to get some advice, either from a financial advisor or from whoever helps you with taxes, about get some strategy around, if I have different pools of assets to pull from, what is going to be the kind of the optimal answer? And that's going to change throughout your retirement life cycle. The right answer for you later in retirement may not be the same as is the case for you right when you begin your retirement.
One of my favorite comments from the book is that you write that retirement is less than 50% about money. What's the other 50%, and how do we make sure we get that right?
Yeah, it's huge, Jean. I think I really underappreciated the non-financial aspects of retirement. But there's all that stuff I was talking about before. There's relationships, there's purpose, which I love. Jordan Grummett ended the book. He's a hospice doctor who's also a podcaster and blogger and just a great human being. He talks about the value of purpose. He works with people on their deathbeds about what their regrets are, what things they want to try to mend in their lives before they go. And his point to all of us is that we should, especially as we embark on this exciting chapter of retirement, really take stock of the things that we want to get done in our lifetimes. And don't wait until the very last minute. It's a great opportunity as you retire to explore a little bit and maybe dabble in things that your work life just didn't give you the opportunity to work on, to do a little bit of free range exploration, explore your creative side. So I love that aspect of the book, and I love accentuating that aspect of retirement planning because, frankly, I think I've underplayed it in my career. I was so focused on helping people work on the financial piece. But as I work on this more, I realize that the non-financial piece is way more important.
I love it. We're going to leave it there. Christine Benz, thank you so much for being here. And for all of you who are listening, Christine has volunteered or been volunteered into coming back to answer your retirement questions. Send us your retirement questions specifically for Christine, and we will dig into them then. Thank you so much for being here and doing this, and congratulations.
Jean, thank you so much. It's been my honor, and thank you again for your contribution to the book.